shit.
It's recording. Just start whenever you're ready, dude.
Oh, okay.
We're recording of us all laughing.
Welcome to H1veM1. This is the speaker. I'm here with my co-host Corey Diggs and the Sharp Edge. How you guys doing?
Doing good.
Doing good. Could use a little more sleep, but other than that, I'm doing good. How about you guys?
We've had a hectic week to get this up and running. So many problems from all of us. But we finally got here to talk about a few things. Well, first, a few big things that happened this week is Ratcliffe taking over for Coates as Director of National Intelligence. That was pretty big. Trump's tweets about Baltimore, which caused a lot of shit from the left anyway. I thought it was fantastic because you actually had the left defending inner cities like they're some sort of great place. We're going to touch on the Sharp Edge's latest dig, Follow the Green, the Greenberg Epstein Connection, and touch on a little bit of Corey's new dig, which is coming up, which I don't know the name of yet. Hopefully,
nor do I.
She can enlighten us. Yeah, let's get into it a little bit. Ed, why don't we start with yours?
With my dig?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm super prepared.
Yeah, that monster dig you did, which is pretty much an article.
I know, right? Everybody's like, why aren't you just, putting this in an article? Yeah, I know.
She's working on that.
Yeah, I know. She's getting there. But that was pretty amazing dig, and you put it together pretty quick.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I didn't really expect for it to lead into so many different things. I was just following Epstein's early days and his early connections, but I also kind of wanted to follow the money and see where that went. And so I kind of looked into the Greenberg Connection, which basically, so Alan Ace Greenberg is or was, the head of Bear Stearns. But so let me back up a little bit. So mid-70s, Epstein, he drops out of school. He gets this job as a math and science teacher at the Dalton School. And that's how he's introduced to Ace Greenberg, because apparently he was tutoring Greenberg's son at the time and then dating his daughter, Lynn. So that apparently is why Ace Greenberg brought him on to Bear Stearns. I don't know. It just seems a little odd to me that was the case. But not only that, but he becomes mentored by them, by Ace Greenberg and James Kane, which was like the second in line, who eventually became the one that took over after Ace. Not only that, but in 4 years, he rises to limited partner, which is just a rung beneath full partner. And I thought that was bizarre too. Like people take
4 years,
a whole lifetime to get to that level. And he rises in 4 years. He becomes Ace's golden boy, quote unquote. This is from Filthy Rich, which is a book that was written about Epstein. So he becomes Ace's golden boy in charge of running numbers, basically, for a select group of Bear Stearns' wealthiest clients, like the elite of the elite at Bear Stearns. And this includes, and it only names one client, Seagram CEO Edgar Bronfman. Red flag.
Yep.
I've done like 2 or 3 digs on Edgar Bronfman. I mean, not only the H1veM connection, obviously, with his daughters being involved in H1veM, but Bronfman was, president of the World Jewish Congress, which has connections to Mossad through David Kimchi, has connections to Mossad through the Mega Group, which also, has been alleged to have been involved in some Israeli intelligence operations as well. So the fact that the only known client of Jeffrey Epstein's at Bear Stearns was Edgar Bronfman definitely raises red flags and makes me wonder who else were his clients, which we don't know because, of course, they're so secretive about the client list. But Vicky Ward came out. She's a journalist, an investigative journalist, and she's done a lot of reports on Epstein over the years, going back more than a decade, and interviewed some of his friends and his inner circle who have said that Jeffrey Epstein told them that he basically was a headhunter for governments and very rich people recovering their money that was either lost or stolen. Okay. And they named, according to Vicky Ward, they named one client, and that was Adnan Khashoggi. So Vicky Ward only recently came out making this claim about this new revelation about Adnan Khashoggi being one of Epstein's clients. We don't know exactly the time frame. We just know it was in the 80s, I believe the early 80s. So this may have been possibly while he was at Bear Stearns, or perhaps after Bear Stearns when he left Bear Stearns. But we do know, according to Vicky Ward, that he was a client. So if you put into context the time frame, well, first of all, let me back up. So Ace Greenberg, not a whole lot of damning information about him in particular. He was part of this elite group of bankers called Kappa Beta Phi, which they're kind of like a fraternity. Did a little digging into them. It's a little shady, a bunch of bankers getting together once a year, dressing in drag and making, dirty jokes and stuff. That's about it that I can find out.
I don't want to know what's going on in Alfred Cater Pie or whatever the hell they want to call it.
I saw that in a movie once. What is with the whole drag part to that?
I don't know. It's bizarre. But so yeah, Ace Greenberg and James Cain are both members of Kappa Beta Phi. Ace also has strong ties to Israel. I'm not implying there's any, intel relationship going on there, but definitely has strong ties to the Bronfman family and to contributions made to different Jewish organizations, and in particular the UJA. So, but moving on. So the time frame is really important. When Epstein was at Bear Stearns, and then later, like after he'd just left Bear Stearns, during that time, so 76 through 80, 81-ish, Epstein managed finances for the elite of the elite, such as Edgar Bronfman. But also in 76 through 77, George H.W. Bush was the director of the CIA. And then from 77 to 79 was the director of the Council of Foreign Relations. And then he went on to be VP.
It's always all about the timelines, I'm telling you.
Exactly. So during this time, the Medellin cartel, they were doing a major drug trafficking operation of cocaine up through Florida and into other parts like Louisiana, Arkansas. And they were working with the CIA and the Mossad. It was a gun running and drug trafficking that was going on. And it got uncovered later in like 86, 87-ish. And then they kind of built this story around it of basically they were trying to help the Contras overthrow the government. So that's why they were allowing the drug trafficking and gun running. But really the CIA and Mossad were involved in this major drug trafficking and gun running operation going on in the late 70s and all through the 80s. Okay, so makes me just wonder, okay, if Epstein is running numbers for the elite of the elite at Bear Stearns, including Bronfman, who else is he running numbers for? We only know his other client is Adnan Khashoggi, and guess what? Adnan Khashoggi was a key player in the Iran-Contra affair. Once it came out in the mid-'80s, he was the guy, the arms dealer who negotiated the arms deal. So just wondering who else Epstein was running numbers for at Bear Stearns. Was some of the money from the Iran Contra or the drug and gun running that was going on? Were they washing money is my question. So basically there's a lot of information that I go into on this dig about the Iran-Contra. It looks like from the circumstantial evidence that we have that what they were doing is they would launder the money, and it was billions, like $350 billion,
Wow.
that they had to wash. And they would use these smaller banks that would be bought by the larger banks. And we have one scenario where we've tracked it with, BCCI was the bigger bank that it was attached to. Another scenario where AIG was the institution that was connected to a smaller bank that was doing the money laundering. We know Adnan Khashoggi was the arms dealer that was involved in Iran-Contra. He also got busted later for racketeering and fraud. And at the same time, in those early 80s and late 70s, there were several honeypot schemes. So Epstein wasn't the first one. He's just the one of many. This is really just more of like a grand scope of Epstein's role in a much larger syndicate. There was the Franklin scandal. There was this Craig Spence, the callboy ring. There was the Catholic Covenant House. All these things were going down, and it was all part of this larger, grander scheme. The same players basically behind the scenes were involved in all of these things. While this drug running and gun running is going on and money's getting washed, that was like 70s, 80s, early 80s, Epstein gets involved in this little issue with his client, Edgar Bronfman. So there's a deal that kind of prompts the SEC to investigate, and they determine that it's insider trading, and then Epstein immediately resigns. Okay. Mm-hmm. And the deal was with Edgar Bronfman, Epstein's client. So then Epstein leaves Bear Stearns and kind of gets this new mentor. His name is Stephen Jude Hoffenberg. Well, Stephen Jude Hoffenberg claims that Epstein told him that he had left Bear Stearns in 81 after it was discovered he was discovered doing illegal operations. And he doesn't really get into what those illegal operations were. So this Stephen Jude Hoffenberg, he gets busted for doing a Ponzi scheme, and he gets 20 years for doing it. And Epstein, he claims, was part of this Ponzi scheme. And that Epstein had all these shell corporations, and so it was Epstein was a total co-conspirator, but Epstein denies the allegations and he walks away. So now we have two scandals that Epstein's walked away from: the Bear Stearns one with Edgar Bronfman, and now this $450 million Ponzi scheme with Hoffenberg, one of the largest Ponzi schemes in U.S. history. He walks away from that. So I'm wondering, how does this guy get away with everything? He's got to know people, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So then he goes and he starts these, he starts J. Epstein Co., and that's out of the Virgin Islands. He's got the house in Florida, Palm Beach, Florida. And this is the same stomping grounds as that CIA and Mossad drug and gun running operation. So to me, it just seemed really super convenient that he's got an offshore company that could easily launder things.
Oh yeah, because he's a puppet.
Exactly.
So many coincidences.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure it's got nothing to do with nothing.
So then we get into Mena, Arkansas, because the drug and gun running didn't stop it in Florida. It went on into Mena, Arkansas, which was surprisingly Bill Clinton's area while he was governor. And so this major operation's going down in Arkansas at the same time. And, there have been multiple whistleblowers talk about this. Larry Nichols to Terry Reid, written books, done interviews, etc., come out speaking at length about this operation that happened down in Mena, Arkansas, where they were running $100 million a month in drug trafficking. And they had to wash all that money. Well, who's washing it? So like I said, they were using these smaller banks that were bought out by larger banks. So the smaller banks, if anybody got busted, it was going to be the smaller banks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So here's an example. They had a little bank called, it was Coral Reef. Okay. Well, Coral Reef was actually founded by AIG. And the interesting little side story about the name of Coral Reef is that it's alleged to have been named after Coral Baca, the wife of the Medellin warlord at the time. So anyways, there's this shady $60 million deal through Clinton's AFTA, which he was funneling all this, apparently, allegedly funneling all this drug money through AFTA. And so the shady $60 million deal goes down involving Coral Reef, which is owned by AIG. And Coral Baca was allegedly claiming to be legal counsel for AIG at the time, even though she wasn't even a lawyer. So it was clearly a case where people at the time were up and, were really investigating, because they were like, they knew there was a major drug trafficking situation going on in Mena. And this was another huge red flag when they saw this deal go down. It was clearly a case of money laundering. So that leads to AIG, because now we know AIG is in on it, right? And so you look at the head of AIG at the time, that's Maurice Hank Greenberg. Now, this book, The Conspirators, that I read, it's from an insider, someone who ran Black Ops for Iran-Contra. He claims that Hank Greenberg of AIG and Ace Greenberg of Bear Stearns are cousins. I cannot find any supporting, evidence. I've done the research. I've looked at their family tree. I've gone back 3 generations. I can't find the connection. But there's circumstantial evidence to support it. They're similar in age. They're, they both rose to power, similar time frames, both titans in their, particular fields. It's a possibility, a strong possibility, but I can't find it other than Al Martin's claims. Hank Greenberg's very interesting. He was the predecessor at AIG of Cornelius Vander Star, who was both a businessman and an operative for the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, basically the CIA before it was the CIA. Mm-hmm. And so Cornelius Vander Star is the the great uncle of none other than Ken Starr, one of the attorneys behind Epstein's 2008 non-prosecution agreement. So there's always these little connections. Epstein keeps coming back up in this larger, grander story. Epstein keeps popping back up. AIG seems as deep state as it can get. Maurice Greenberg, he was okay. Sorry, I had to read. I'm reading. He's president of AIG.
Waiting.
Excuse me a second. I had to scroll.
Look, you're making a lot of mistakes, Edge.
Isn't Hank Maurice? I'm confused. Isn't Hank Maurice?
Yes. So his name's actually Maurice, but he goes by Hank. Okay. They all have nicknames. I don't know if they just like to make it more confusing for people.
Absolutely. They like to misspell the names too. Mm-hmm. And they like to choose names. They'll change their names and they'll make it like a real simple name like John Smith or excuse me, or a famous name.
That's
so when
exactly
you
what
search things out, it makes it 10 times trickier to get to the bottom of it.
All right. So Maurice Hank Greenberg, who is he named himself Hank after a famous baseball player, Corey, so you are correct. He was the president of AIG. He was a candidate in 95 to become director of the CIA. He was the vice chairman and director of the Council on Foreign Relations, and he was the director of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. So this guy is super well connected, deep state ties everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so not only that, and not only the Ace Greenberg connection, but also the Ken Starr and the Cornelius Starr connection. We've got Henry Kissinger, who chairs both AIG International advisory boards and several other boards connected to AIG. And then we have Kroll. So in 93, AIG became co-owner of this spy agency. It's a private spy agency called Kroll. And Kroll was notorious back in the 80s as the CIA for Wall Street. After the 93 World Trade Center bombing, Kroll got the security contracts on all of the buildings, coincidentally, that were blown up and destroyed in 9/11. Okay.
Imagine that.
Yeah, so not only that, but Hank Greenberg's son is Jeffrey. So Jeffrey Greenberg was the CEO of Marsh and McLennan. He is also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and him and his dad were huge fans of the Bushes, like major donors to the Bushes, all their campaigns. There's more connections with them in the Bushes. I just didn't have time to go into all that. But so in 98...
Yeah, it would have become a 100-point thread.
Right?
Yeah.
So in 98, AIG invests $1.35 billion in this company called Blackstone. AIG, Blackstone, and Kissinger Associates partner together. Then in October 2000, Blackstone Real Estate purchases the mortgage of World Trade Center 7. Okay. The plane that crashed into the North Tower on 9/11 crashed directly into the 2 floors where Marsh and McLennan were located, and destroying all kinds of evidence. And Kroll and Associates, which Marsh and McLennan and AIG are associated with, was the company, the private security company holding the contract there at that building. So this guy, Richard Grove, he comes out in 2006. He is a whistleblower who worked for this company called Silverstream. And Silverstream runs these internet trading platforms. They build them. And at the time, Marsh had contracted them to create this software for them that was going to give them this connectivity between Marsh and AIG that was so streamlined. It was going to be like the first 2 companies on the planet to have this kind of software. And Silverstream was contracted to do this and set it up in the World Trade Center 1, and the deadline was July 2001. Okay, so 2 months prior. Yeah. So this guy Grove, he's working for Silverstream. He notices this $7 million overpayment between Marsh and Silverstream. And he tells his higher ups, and his higher ups are like, "You need to shut up, man. You need to shut up." They even offer him hush money, but he doesn't stop there. He decides to contact Marsh and let him know, "Look, I have evidence that there's some kind of shady deal going on here. You guys overpaid us $7 million. So Marsh summons him to meet with them and bring all of his evidence to the World Trade Center on 9/11.
Oh, boy.
Okay.
Oh, boy.
He gets stuck in traffic. And
I haven't heard this one before. This is interesting.
And he watches as the planes, crash into the buildings.
Wow.
And so, anyways, there's this really interesting interview that he does. I've got it on my thread. I don't, have to play that for you now, but it's super interesting, making all those connections. CIA, Mossad, the Bushes, AIG,
Iran-Contra, everything.
Yeah, all of it
Epstein.
Is even Enron. There was, there's a bunch of connections, man. I mean, I don't have time to get into it now, but it does all connect. And little bits and pieces here and there go back to Epstein. Like, he's just this tiny player in a much grander.
That happens to be in the right place at the right time every time.
Yeah. So So here's another interesting connection. So 9/11 hijacker Mohammed Atta. We touched a little bit on this, last week. Well, he was trained originally at Huffman Aviation. So that school was funded by a guy named Wally Hilliard with Oryx Corp. And Oryx was founded by Epstein's client, Adnan Khashoggi, who always keeps popping up in these stories, along with the Sheikh Kamal Adam, who was the director of Saudi intelligence at the time. So then Mohammed Atta goes and hones his skills at Florida's Lantana Airport out of Palm Beach County. And both of these airports have a long history of criminal activity connected to the CIA and Mossad. And coincidentally or not, Jeffrey Epstein's assistant, Nadia Marcinkova, was also trained out of Lantana Airport at around the same time as Atta. So what kind of trafficking may she have been involved in? What kind of jobs may she have been doing? I don't know. But it's just all these little coincidences adding up. So you fast forward to the 2008 financial crisis, and it's all the same players. So we have the Bush administration, we have Ace Greenberg's Bear Stearns, we have Maurice Greenberg's AIG. They're deemed too big to fail. They get a $210 billion government bailout through the Bush administration. By way of the Paradise Papers, we now know Epstein's Liquid Funding Limited was heavily invested in Bear Stearns subprime mortgage-backed securities, which is exactly the type of securities that is what made Bear Stearns spark the 2008 financial crisis. So my question is, was the financial crisis manufactured? Were these deep state players using shell companies like Epstein's Liquid Funding to spark that financial crisis?
Mm-hmm.
And then, all the big players, AIG, Bear Stearns, et cetera, get bailouts. Well, here's another connection. So we have Blackstone, who was tied to this whole 9/11 thing with AIG and Kissinger. They have a spinoff company called BlackRock. It's a Cayman Island bank, and it's tasked to evaluate the fairness of JP Morgan acquisitions of Bear Stearns. The deal involved a bailout of Bear Stearns creditors through the Fed. So Blackstone is the one deciding it. And there's more. So the lead negotiator of the deal, the president of the New York Fed at that time, was Geithner, and he is a former employee of Kissinger Associates. And he was appointed to the Fed by Peter Peterson of Blackstone. See, it's just a big circle.
Aren't these webs fun?
It's a big circle.
And the webs just keep going, and you're like, where the hell do I cut this off to tell the story?
It's crazy. No, and then it goes back to the original. It goes back circles all the way back around. So Geithner was an employee of Kissinger Associates when it was in discussions with a merger with BCCI, one of those banks who was indicted for drug money laundering during the Iran-Contra. So
God.
all goes around in a big circle. So anyways, I just wanted to expose Epstein's small part in a much larger criminal syndicate. And it's not just about honeypots. It's not just about pedophilia. It's about drug money, gun money, laundering that money through financial institutions. So bank fraud, shell companies, etc. And Epstein's got little parts and little roles throughout that whole story.
Right.
I'm sure there's more more industries and shit that Epstein is connected to anyway.
Oh yeah, there's webs everywhere. Good work on that, Edge.
Yeah, that was an awesome dig, Edge.
Thanks.
I'm very impressed with that. Let's lead into yours a little bit now, Corey. Where's your head at for your next dig?
Oh boy. Well, before we do, so I'm still working on mine, as you know, but before we do, I just want to quickly talk about these Hilary Swank movies.
Oh yeah, okay. I forgot to mention that.
The fun stuff. I want to talk about the fun stuff. Well, maybe they're not so fun if you watch the trailers to these movies. But here's the thing. So we've got one on Netflix called I Am Mother. And then we have one, I don't even know if this one's out yet. Do you guys know? Called The Hunt, which is Hilary Swank leads a shadowy cabal of elites who hunt everyday citizens for sport. So, and I Am Mother is about robots, AI, raising a baby, and they have this whole like incubator system inside this building, which I don't know if it's underground or above ground. It's kind of hard to tell from the trailer, but bottom line is there's these robots, they raise this child, and she says, well, why aren't there more children? And you can see them all in the little incubators, and she gets to the point where, I don't know, she looks to be maybe around 16. And then all of a sudden in comes Hilary Swank from the outside, open the doors. And she's like, I didn't think there were any other humans alive. And she refers to the robot as mother because, that's who raised her. And she says, did you lie to me? And she said, oh, I didn't know either. I thought they were all gone and da-da-da. And so it's this whole thing where Hilary Swank is saying, you have a, what did she call him? Was it Borg or Cyborg or something like that? You've got one of those in here, and we got to get out, and you haven't seen what they've done, like, because they obviously destroyed humanity. So here's what's interesting, and of course the cabal of elites, hunting citizens, which I believe, based on the trailer, was Hilary Swank's in this movie. This was her idea that they should set up this whole hunting expedition. So I had tweeted out asking people, do you think this is disclosure? Do you think this is fear tactics? Discuss. And I don't know that anyone touched on this or not from the last time I had read the comments in the thread. But this is what they do. I just want to go over their tactics. It's not really that it's about disclosure or fear tactics. It's about them getting ahead of the narrative and controlling it. And we've seen this throughout history. So, for example, you've got people start saying that, putting in reports that they've seen UFOs, and then we have Project Blue Book, and all of a sudden they step in and they start making all those people seem like they're crazy, and they create all this confusion. And then we have this New Age movement, which kind of started in the 60s, and then it kind of swung back around in the 80s, 90s, and spiritual and meditational and all these groups getting together, and it was this whole new, referred to as the New Age movement. So then what they do is they instill their gurus, and they control the narrative, and they start calling these people Fruit Loops and crazies. And so they get in there and they immerse themselves in the situation or in whatever that trend may be or whatever narrative is building, and they take control of it. They did it with the organic narrative, with organic foods. When GMOs started building, I did a report on that. They stepped in, as we know, Jeff Bezos from Amazon now owns Whole Foods. But they actually stepped in long ago, like back in I think it was early to mid 90s. They stepped in and they started seeing, okay, there's this big organic movement, so we better get in here and control this. That way we can control both sides of the coin.
Exactly.
So this is what's happening. So with these movies, they see all of us working our tails off, exposing all this corruption and what would seem like crazy things that would be in a sci-fi movie, but they are actually happening. And so what do? They put together these movies that literally mimic what we are reporting. Mm-hmm. So they can then say, when someone tries to explain this to someone and say, look, this is what's going on. See, these are the biotech companies. This is AI. This is how far they've come. This is what they're trying to do. And then someone looks at the person and says, you're crazy. That was in a movie. I saw that in a movie.
Exactly.
So that's what they're doing, is they're trying to get ahead of it, and they're trying to control the narrative and try to make everyone seem like crazy conspiracy theorists.
Corey, it's exactly what they're doing with the deepfake. They know that, photos, videos, etc. are going to come out before the 2020 election, and they're already running this huge campaign of getting ahead of the story to discredit through this whole deepfake thing.
Right. Right.
So that
You're
if
talking about like the video editing and everything?
yes. So if any real video comes out, it's a deep fake.
Oh, yeah. We started seeing them do that. What was it, about a year ago? They started doing that. As soon as they started, we're like, oh, here we go. They're getting ahead of it.
Yeah. So if any real information comes out about a shadowy cabal of elites who hunt everyday citizens for sport, then it's just a movie. It's just a movie, y'all. Move along.
Right.
I saw it on TV. Just easy done. And a lot of and a lot of people started posting about those deep fakes. Adam Schiff, I think Brennan did as well.
Yeah.
So like they're really trying to get behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the thing is, it technically is disclosure. So when you see them come out with something that you're already seeing reports on, backed with some legitimate evidence, that's your tip off that, okay, it's not so much they're disclosing this, they're trying to control the narrative. That said, we know we're on the right track. We know that what we're reporting on is pretty good evidence. If they're feeling the need, they feel compelled to have to create a movie and get ahead of this narrative.
Bingo.
So in a sense, it is disclosure as well, but not that, hopefully that's not the future, being raised by robots and the land decimated.
We can pray.
Yeah.
But, then you think of that Madonna video where everything's decimated and they have the Statue of Liberty falling over and not everyone's going to get to come. Isn't that like the main lyrics there, the main chorus to it, I think?
I don't know. It's been a long time since I watched anything to do with Madonna.
Oh, that was one that came out a few months back. It was
She's still making music?
So much symbolism. Oh yeah. 6 plastic surgeries later. Yeah.
Oh, shit.
So yeah. So I just wanted to quickly go over that before getting into my report that I'm working on, which I was, hoping to have done by this weekend. But the reality is there are now so many players involved in this that I'm thinking I'm going to have to create a diagram. Literally, I'm going to have to grab, company logos and faces of people, and I'm going to have to chart this out and show how this all connects, because it's a very tangled, messy web, an Epstein web, and there's just so many people involved. So, and this connects out in the islands, and while doing this research, I came across this, and some people might already be familiar with this. I was not. So I thought it was kind of interesting. It would be something fun to share here. And I sent you, Edge, I sent you over the map of this so that people can actually see what we're talking about here.
I know. I lost it.
Because our threads get so
that was
long,
yesterday.
And then to try and scroll, I'll send it to you again. I wake up in the morning and I see about 50 tweets back and forth between you guys, and I'm, oh my God, they're ADD, they're all over the place. And somewhere in the middle of there is a question for me that I have to find.
Right. I think you sent that
Not our fault.
I think you sent that to me right before my computer crashed and I lost everything. I'm like, and then today I'm like, what were we going to talk about? Now I'm trying to scramble to find all the things. Nah, I couldn't find it.
I know, it was pretty crazy yesterday. And speakers mic going in and out, so we actually had to
flash on that. Bullshit, man. That's such bullshit.
Technical difficulties.
Well, we fixed it and we ended up here. So it's so
Meanwhile,
good.
I'm looking up. Is Mercury in retrograde, or the electromagnetic field's really high right now? What's going on?
Man, people have no idea what goes on behind the scenes.
It's a lot of work, dude.
All right. Corey, send me that. I'll add it.
Okay, I will do that. So this is just an interesting few little factoids on St. John Island, which is, if you're looking at the map, you've got Little St. James, Great St. James, and to the left or the west, you have St. Thomas, and to the right, you have St. John. So Lawrence Rockefeller, philanthropist, they refer to all of them as philanthropists. If I get rich, do I get that title too?
Philanthropist.
That's just a cover. Meaning
It just comes with everything.
I give money to foundations that are really just using it for nefarious activities.
Exactly. So anyway, back in the 50s, while cruising the Caribbean, he, discovered how beautiful St. John was and decided this needed to be preserved. So he had read this report from 1939 about the possibility of turning St. John into a national park. And so he decided, well, that's a fine idea. So myself and this Jackson Hole Preserve, which is this nonprofit conservation organization, decided, well, we're going to purchase this up. So they purchased up 5,000 acres, and the island itself is only 12,500 acres. But over time, it expands. So get this. So they purchase it, and then they decide they take their deeds and they turn them over to the federal government to create the nation's 29th national park. So in 1956, that becomes a national park. So it doesn't sound like much of a big deal, but you start looking at it and you see over time the boundary keeps expanding. So then it expanded, they added another 650 acres to offshore water. And then they, over time, it ended up growing to like almost 7,300 acres. And then they decided in the 70s, they needed to expand this boundary to include 122 acres of Hassel Island, which is right over by, in St. Thomas Harbor, which has a history of military, commercial, agricultural type stuff. So then in 2001, enrolls President Clinton. And he decides to use his power to establish the Virgin Islands Coral Reef National Monument. So this provides more protection to the marine features that are adjacent to the national park. And so now we're up to like 13,000 acres. And if you look on the map and look at the diagram, you can see probably 85% of the island is now under this either national park or national monument, as well as the border going all the way around, about 3/4 of it expanding out into the water beyond the coral reef. So this is like all now protected land. And we have just these small areas, and the population of those small areas represents about 17,000 people. So the reason I find this interesting, and I'm sure you guys, most people have already caught on and nothing even needs to be said, is what the hell is going on this island? They're obviously, these people, by making things lands, national parks, national land, whatever, they now have control over it. And if you're keeping people in power that are going to continue that control, then, these areas are only open to the public at certain times. Now, supposedly they say about 600,000 people a year travel over there and go through this national park. So I can't say what might be going on. I find this incredibly suspicious, and I definitely think there is more to this, and there's something going on here that they are trying to maintain control of 85% of the island with surrounding waters. I do not buy for 1 minute that these people give a shit about the environment and protecting it as a preserve.
Not at all. They don't give a shit. Come on.
Right.
So yeah, I agree, because I just started digging into Disney Cruise Line and their connection down there in the islands, and that led me to other islands. And if you just look back in the history of a lot of these places, they have been historically used for gun running and drug trafficking and other
military bases,
illegal activities. So, and secret, ops. So,
right.
Yeah, there's a history there to justify your suspicions.
Right. And so whereas this isn't part of my report I'm working on, I just thought it was some interesting tidbits to share, and people can have at it digging into that further if they want. I'm going to be continuing, like I said, I got to put together my little diagram here. I'm still actually making connections. So I'm still in the digging process. I haven't even begun writing it up yet. It's taken, there's about 150 different points to dig. I'm like, damn.
I don't know how you girls organize that shit.
Each one 10 points to dig into, and so, but it gets to, I actually work better alone with my dig because I get on a roll and I'm going down certain paths. And if I have someone else trying to dig into stuff, throwing stuff at me, it's just a distraction because that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just more time consuming that way. So
yeah. And what I've discovered is that you may start digging on one thing and it leads to a totally different thing that you weren't looking for, but is like
every time
deeper, and you're like, whoa.
Yeah.
And then you just start going down that rabbit hole. Yeah.
And you're like, well, wait a minute, if that connects, now I got to look back to this decade or that year because I have no doubt that this person was probably involved. And lo and behold, there it is. And yeah.
Yep.
So fun stuff.
Well, let's wind it up there. Good chat, girls. That was great. About time we bloody got this shit done.
Hey, I'm surprised we did get it done with all the technical difficulties.
I know.
The power of perseverance.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. That's right. And by next week, hopefully by the time we record next week, I'll have this other report, and then we can hammer through that.
That'd be awesome.
That'd be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. If we'll see where mine goes. I don't know. I really have no idea. It's just in the early stages, but I'm finding out some really cool.
It's going to be really cool, though, taking all of these side by side and connecting them. And I really need that warehouse. I need a giant wall. Print all this out.
That's why I don't get it.
I want a huge map of the Caribbean for one.
Yeah, so we can totally look like conspiracy theorists. Let's have I'm
even going to do the thumbtacks with the red thread, No, I'm totally serious.
We're working our way towards it.
I will happily wear my tinfoil hat.
Yeah, I think that this stuff that I'm looking into, it dovetails into what you're talking about, Corey. So yeah, that'd be cool if we could.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to compare notes on these digs we're up to right now.
All right, so you want to wrap it up?
Yep.
Thanks for joining us. Please share, like, and subscribe. Visit our websites. All the information will be in the description below. We'll see you back next time right here on HiveMind.
Smash that fucking like button.
Right.
Yeah.